Disney Springs is one of the more interesting Disney projects from the last decade. While I'm generally rather creatively disinterested in how Walt Disney World has changed and transformed under the leadership of Bob Iger, I'm actually quite fond of Disney Springs. I do often see negative sentiment directed towards it though, arguing that it's less interesting than its previous iteration, Downtown Disney. While I agree that there are certainly elements that are executed poorly, especially with the re-theme of the world of Disney, I do think that Disney Springs is generally a worthy replacement to its aged predecessor. There are certainly stores where Disney merchandise is featured pretty heavily, which makes for a strange juxtaposition with the more generic retail that anchors the center of Disney Springs. However, there are quite a few stores that I frequent on casual trips there, which includes the Lego store, the Coca-Cola store, the Art of Disney, the Savannah Bee Company, and the occasional chocolate shop like the Ganachery or Amorette's Patisserie. It's also worth noting that many of the restaurants have interesting themed retail located adjacent to their dining. While Disney Springs is a bit lighter on entertainment than I would prefer, it does offer a pretty large AMC theater, which I frequent often, in addition to a number of novelties such as the Drawn to Life performance at Cirque du Soleil, the hot air balloon known as the Aerophile, and the amphicars at the Boathouse. However, where Disney Springs really shines is with its restaurant selection, offering many of the best that you can find around Orlando. While not all of Disney Springs interests me, especially with its more generic stores, it still offers quite the selection of interesting activities, restaurants, and retail, all tied together under a cohesive theme. The theme itself has led to the creation of an aesthetically pleasing space, hiding a story underneath that most patrons won't notice. That's why I thought that this video would be interesting, giving us the opportunity to explore the surprisingly complex story that is hidden in plain sight. There's a lot of interesting components that go into it, so without further delay, let's dive into the lore of Disney Springs. The inception of Disney Shopping District begins in 1975, with the premiere of the Lake Buena Vista Shopping Village. It was built as part of a larger project that would work as a precursor to Epcot, as in the city, not the theme park. In the early 1970s, a number of small two-story villas were built along what was named the Village Lagoon. This was connected with an artificial canal to Black Lake, which is the body of water that Disney Springs borders today, and was renamed to Lake Buena Vista during construction. The villas were originally intended as homes that could be leased or sold to corporate partners, but Disney quickly realized that this could cause problems in their special tax district of Reedy Creek. If Disney was to start introducing residents to their property, the residents themselves could potentially vote against Disney in the future, and so the villas were then converted to accommodate larger vacationing families to Walt Disney World. At the time, this area was completely disconnected from the other Disney resorts and the Magic Kingdom, so it made sense to create a commercial district as the Lake Buena Vista Shopping Village, servicing the villas and nearby hotels. Initially, this included shopping and dining, with the most prolific restaurant being Captain Jack's Oyster Bar, and even a grocery store known as the Gourmet Pantry, which would actually deliver to the villas on request. A few examples of stores you could find would be Sir Edward's Haberdasher and Shoe Time, which seems pretty self-explanatory from the name. Other examples include the Pottery Chalet, which featured outdoor pottery and statues, and Toys Fantastique, which would set up elaborate displays to sell toys. In 1977, the name was changed to the Walt Disney World Village, and a new dining location, the Empress Lily, was built, allowing diners to enjoy views of Lake Buena Vista from the faux steam paddler. During the early 80s, there were plans for expansion to the shops, which would have also added a people mover that moved around the district, in addition to a monorail that would have connected to a planned office park and Epcot, which was in its late stages of construction at the time. I am a bit disappointed that this project never happened, because an expanded monorail line to the area would have been fantastic. Had this plan come to fruition, and it very nearly did, the additional level of convenient interconnectivity could have changed the development of transportation around Walt Disney World instead of becoming the messy network of slow buses that define much of it today. Another cancelled plan during this time concerns expansion past the Empress Lily, developing a New Orleans square inspired by the one in Disneyland, but existing as a lively shopping, dining, and entertainment district that was free to access as part of the Walt Disney World Village. This too is an incredibly intriguing concept, as New Orleans Square is one of Disney's most interesting and best themed lands. If it had been built, I have to imagine that it would have set a precedent for continuing to build highly themed and immersive shopping districts for this area, which would have changed its development in an interesting way. Still, with Epcot going over budget and the company not doing too well financially during this period, the plans were unfortunately cancelled. A quick favor before we continue, but if you found the video interesting thus far, you can do me a favor by simply hitting the like button. The next expansion for the shopping district would come with a rename, and it would be known as the Disney Village Marketplace, which would coincide with the introduction of Pleasure Island in 1989. Now under the direction of Michael Eisner as CEO, this era of Disney was concerned with snuffing out competition by emulating other entertainment in a uniquely Disney way. At the time, many young adults visiting or staying on Disney property were leaving at night for Church Street Station in downtown Orlando, which was a series of clubs and bars that collectively were among Florida's largest tourist destinations. Wanting to draw people away, Pleasure Island was designed as an adult district of Disney, allowing people entry to all of the clubs and bars by either showing proof of having purchased Disney park tickets or paying a one-time entry fee. Pleasure Island was unlike anything offered elsewhere, premiering with a slate of unique and highly themed venues and celebrating New Year's every single night. Pleasure Island itself actually has a rather convoluted backstory about an adventurer named Merryweather Pleasure. However, the story can essentially be boiled down to Disney rediscovering his old industrial shipbuilding base, and the various buildings would have plaques outside, detailing their individual histories. For example, the Fireworks Factory was a restaurant with a pretty obvious theme, with its story relating how Merryweather set off the world's largest firecracker in 1917, destroying a portion of the land and creating the island. From there, he would name it Pleasure Island, based on a vision he had of a playful, moon-headed spirit known as the Funmeister that he had witnessed years earlier while exploring Mexico. In its earliest years, the Funmeister was the official mascot of Pleasure Island, though Jessica Rabbit soon usurped him in popularity. Another example that ties into the story is the Adventurers Club, which existed as Merryweather's personal library and artifact museum that he used to host other adventurers in. In reality, the space was a highly themed improv comedy and nightclub, incorporating animatronics and introducing the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, which would become an elaborate story spread among Disney parks across the world. A list of other significant venues includes the country music-focused Neon Armadillo, the improv-based Comedy Warehouse, the Pleasure Island Jazz Company, and the somewhat creepy Mannequin's Dance Palace, among many other establishments, restaurants, and retail. Pleasure Island was extremely successful not just financially, but also effectively worked to greatly reduce interest in Church Street Station. As Disney looked to expand their retail offerings yet again in the mid-90s, the World of Disney store was introduced to the marketplace in 1996, which has since become a major staple of the experience. In 1997, both districts were combined under the name of Downtown Disney in conjunction with a new district known as the West Side, which incorporated Pleasure Island's AMC Theater in among new shops, restaurants, and entertainment such as Cirque du Soleil and Disney Quest. This expansion also included more prolific additions such as Planet Hollywood and the Rainforest Cafe. However, with the opening of the West Side, traveling between the districts became difficult, and in conjunction with declining attendance, the entry fee was removed to enter Pleasure Island in 2004. However, because now just anybody could wander in, it became even less appealing as reports of fights, theft, and other general crime continued to rise. Long past its heyday, Pleasure Island would close its clubs over the next 4 years, and would become a stagnant area of downtown Disney. Seeing the need to revive the area, in 2010, Disney announced that Pleasure Island would be revamped into a district known as Hyperion Wharf, bringing in a new aesthetic along with a slate of shopping and dining. Yet, with the negative reputation of Pleasure Island, Disney was struggling to find tenants to fill its new area, and progress on reshaping the district abruptly stalled. Pleasure Island sat for a few years as a construction zone that essentially only existed as a pass-through between the marketplace and the west side. But then in 2013, new plans arose. Disney announced the much more ambitious vision of Disney Springs, completely reworking all of downtown Disney with an entirely new purpose, story, and theme. While Disney Springs has continued to evolve past this time frame, the majority of the overhaul was done by 2017, adding minor additions to the marketplace in the west side, as well as replacing the surface parking with 2 large garages. A significant focus of the work, however, centered on overhauling Pleasure Island and converting it into the landing, an idea derived from the earlier Hyperion Wharf. Another goal of the Disney Springs project was to create more accessibility between the districts, and so a 4th district, Town Center, was added to connect everything else together, in addition to adding more bridges to the former Pleasure Island. The Disney Springs retheme also introduced interesting lore and a connected backstory to explain its design choices, so let's now explore this narrative and see what it entails. The story tying everything together is intended to emulate the history of many Florida towns that built up around natural springs. In this case, the springs were discovered in 1850 by a farmer named Martin Sinclair and his wife Clara, who decided to settle on the land and build their own homestead. These buildings are located in the landing and in town center, flanking the springs, and currently are inhabited by Chef Art Smith's Homecoming restaurant, as well as Deluxe Burger. The building for Deluxe Burger is intended to be the original ranch house in the story, decorated with pictures and artwork that chronicle its rise as a restaurant. Outside of the house is an oak tree, and the legend goes that after a particularly fierce storm, Martin sat around a campfire under the tree, watching as the light reflected in the rain droplets on the leaves. This inspired him to name the location as Glowing Oak Ranch, and this main house was used to cook meals for the ranch hands. While attending the St. Louis World's Fair, Martin discovered the hamburger and brought the idea back to the ranch, hosting its first ever Burger Day in 1905. From there, it became the Glowing Oak Restaurant in 1921, and was rebranded in 2016 as Deluxe Burger by Martin Sinclair VI. While I do think that the restaurant itself is quite overrated in terms of its food quality, the theming inside does a good job of providing an interesting atmosphere that tells the story. Located nearby is the Disney Springs Welcome Center. I'm unsure of what the story is here, but judging from the architecture, I'm deducing that it was originally built as a horse stable and later converted into the main house, as indicated by the interior rooms and the outside porch that runs along almost the entirety of the building. Inside, you can find photos and artwork that chronicle the development of farming at Glowing Oak Ranch. The most notable art, though, is a series of paintings located above the various guest service counters, capturing specific historic moments throughout the development of the town. The first painting portrays the original ranch house, when it sat alone alongside the springs. The next painting chronicles the development of the ranch, expanding to include a number of buildings as other people and industries moved in. This particular scene illustrates the Ice House, a building obviously used for the production of ice and currently occupied by Sprinkles, a store that specializes in decadent cupcakes. In the painting, you can see a log cabin attached to the Ice House, and it really does exist with a Pandora jewelry inside, but I can't seem to determine if it has any purpose in the overall Disney Springs story. However, if you go around the side of Sprinkles to the seating area near the springs, you'll see an antique ice making machine, as well as an old sign for the Sunshine State Ice Works, which was established in 1873. Across from Sprinkles is the Mexican restaurant Frontera Coquina, and if you look above, you can see that the building was established as a foundry for the town in 1871. There doesn't seem to be any more backstory found for this building, even in the interior, but it is worth noting. The last remaining building from this era is the Sawmill, currently occupied by Blaze Pizza. If you look carefully at the exterior, you'll spot the old side indicating that this was established in 1868 as the Buena Vista Timber Company. Inside though, you'll find the tables and benches arranged like the old table saws, and if you're observant, you can spot an old piece of machinery above. There is also a slice of a cypress log hanging on the wall, with a sign indicating that it was found in a river in 2013, but was likely cut in 1812. While this area of Disney Springs is rather small, it does act as the genesis for the story, chronicling how the ranch evolved into a small industry town in the mid to late 1800s. If we continue following the story from the paintings in the Welcome Center, the next one we see shows the development of the landing. With so much production going on at the town, now known as the Springs, a port would need to be established in order to engage in trade. Starting from the north, the first iconic building that we can see is the Steam Paddler. When Pleasure Island opened, it was renamed from the Empress Lily to Fulton's Crab House, and now as part of the landing is known as Paddlefish. Continuing forward, there's a brick wall that sports a painting with the orange bird, advertising Florida-grown oranges. What makes this significant is that Disney designed the orange bird as a mascot for the Florida Citrus Commission in 1970, indicating that the landing continued to exist as a trade port during that time. However, if you continue down the alleyway, you'll spot an old advertisement for bottled mineral water. This was actually one of the primary exports from the town, and if you look across the springs from Deluxe Burger, you can see that the building that hosts Morimoto Asia used to be the massive spring water bottling plant. When you go inside, there isn't any evidence left over, but the legacy of the building continues to live on, with the sign still remaining. Located a little ways down from Paddlefish, another seafood restaurant is the Boathouse, which continues to cover nautical transportation with its theme. Nearby, there is also Jock Lindsay's Hangar Bar, covering air transportation. While it's a bit strange that it's based off of an Indiana Jones character, the hangar and the painting in the Welcome Center indicate that seaplanes used to play a part in the transportation hub. Eventually, as you move to the south side of this district, you can spot a number of elements that hint to the past of rail transportation once existing in the area. The building that currently houses STK and its adjacent bathrooms are actually designed to emulate the historic Church Street station. Looking around, you can spot clues that refer to its history, such as this bronze plaque near the ganachery, or on the backside of the station, an old billboard advertising the Sunshine Rail Line. In front of STK, you can also see the remains of train tracks and an old turntable, and the bridge leading out from the island has supports indicating that it was once used for trains as well. A more recent addition to the landing is the Edison, a steampunk-themed restaurant that takes place in an old power plant established in 1901. While the interior has its own respective theming, it does allude to its more utilitarian past in a number of ways. Attached to the same building, Maria and Enzo's is a restaurant that takes place in an old airport terminal, but rather than being used for trade, as with Jock Lindsay's seaplanes, this more upscale interior indicates travel to the Springs for more leisurely purposes. Right outside, a small quick service counter named Pizza Ponte serves, well, pizza slices in the repurposed Terminal Cafe. However, another establishment that can be found connected to this building is Enzo's Hideaway, a speakeasy-style bar discovered by Enzo as he was wandering through abandoned tunnels under the former power plant. He discovered that this was once storage for rum runners, and to open up the location as a smaller restaurant and bar to preserve its history. One last location I would like to speak about is the Ganachery. In the early 20th century, this shop was originally an apothecary, but as chocolate was introduced as an export to the Springs, it was viewed as a healing product that became increasingly popular. Eventually, a couple from South America took ownership of the apothecary, and shoving the more traditional medicinal products to the top of the shelves, the ganachery primarily became a chocolate seller to the benefit of the health of the town's citizens. While not every shop or restaurant in the landing have direct thematic ties that connect to the story of Disney Springs, we can at least see that they exist within what must have previously been a waterfront shopping district. While investigating Raglan Road, for example, I did learn that it's a holdover from Pleasure Island, and while it is a well-themed and atmospheric restaurant, it doesn't tie into the story in any explicit way. Still, this area is incredibly well-themed with a lot of storytelling found throughout, and so it still contributes well to the overall narrative. Moving on to our final 3 paintings in the Welcome Center, I will say that there is less to be found within the other districts, so we will cover these a bit more quickly. Our next destination returns to Town Center, with a painting revealing settlement to the east of the Springs. The buildings are meant to emulate Mediterranean and Spanish Revival architecture, which became popular through historic Florida developers like Henry Flagler and Addison Meisner, which would date this area as having developed roughly between the 1880s and the 1920s. The painting portrays this area of town as wealthy and lavish, which I think also works into how Disney planned to occupy this area with tenants. It very much seems intended to appeal to Orlando locals with its more generic upscale retail than it does vacationing families, and has been criticized for feeling much like any other outdoor Florida shopping mall. Still, it makes sense thematically within the story of Disney Springs, and if you notice, it still is very much designed to look like a town with people living above the shops. It's not completely absent of story though, as the Polite Pig is supposed to occupy the town's former farmers market, and facing towards the old homestead, you'll see many people interacting with the Archimedes screw, which digs up water from the springs. If you head south, a covered market area established in 1913 has been converted into more contemporary retail, and if you move past there, you can see the bathrooms next to the Coca-Cola store used to exist as the town fire station, which seems playfully ironic for a building centered around water. Moving to the next painting, it seems to portray the square that transitions between town center and the marketplace, located right in front of the World of Disney. The marketplace itself still retains a lot of the buildings and architecture that has defined it since it was the late Buena Vista shopping village, but as far as I can determine, it doesn't really tie into the Disney Springs story in any prolific way. The most information I can find is that this area of town developed in the 1930s, showcasing the American craftsman style of architecture for its buildings. However, this isn't to say that story elements are completely absent though. In 2018, the World of Disney went through a major refurbishment and retheme, and while I think it's far less interesting than it was previously, it does hint at a story. Throughout, you can find small remnants of this building once existing as an orange packing plant, with a loading dock sign even pointing to backstage doors only accessible by cast members. However, a stranger part of the story was fabricated, claiming that Walt Disney once established this as a satellite animation studio that has since been long abandoned. After the building was reclaimed for retail in Disney Springs, old remnants of the orange packing plant and animation studio were uncovered and preserved. The marketplace is a strange area of Disney Springs, and how it ties in very little with the story. Whereas the landing is full of restaurants and more interesting novelty retail, and town center is defined by upscale suburban shopping, the marketplace often feels stuck in the 90s, which is actually something that I really like about it. It's very heavily focused on Disney characters and franchise merchandise, and if you walk into the Christmas store, the color palettes and theming allows you to feel as if you're stepping back in time to the Eisner era. This translates to a lot of other shops as well, and other prolific venues are going to include the Rainforest Cafe, the T-Rex restaurant, and of course, the Lego store. Finishing up here though, the final district of Disney Springs is going to be the West Side. Our final painting reveals that this area was founded in 1950 as the Spring Centennial Expo, a World's Fair type of exhibit that showcased a number of inventions and experiences. While technically part of Town Center, I consider both the giant observatory of Planet Hollywood and the Coca-Cola store to be the transition into the West Side. This area hasn't really changed too dramatically since it was initially built for Downtown Disney, still hosting AMC, Splitsville, the House of Blues, and Cirque du Soleil. That being said, the area has seen the occasional new retail store or restaurant, and small aesthetic changes, such as installing the remains of a fictional elevated rail line for the expo, have been added. I'm also unsure of when the hot air balloon, known as the Aerophile, was added to the area, but it has certainly been tied into the story. The largest change to the area, as part of the Disney Springs Incorporation, was the demolishing of Disney Quest in favor of replacing it with the NBA experience. That in itself is a laughably prolific failure, but the new NBA building doesn't seem to explicitly tie into the Disney Springs story. I tend to view the West Side as a rather messy hodgepodge of different leftover buildings from downtown Disney, but having actually done the research for the video, I actually like its thematic justification as a leftover World's Fair type expo. The Disney Springs project was a much needed revival for Disney's retail area, and I think it's obvious how it fixed many of the problems of Pleasure Island and general accessibility. While I'm not a fan of the generic suburban retail that inhabits Town Center, I'm still glad that it exists to create more connectivity between the other districts. However, while I'm very much a fan of Disney Springs currently, I am of the opinion that both the Marketplace and West Side are in need of their own major thematic refurbishments. The Marketplace in particular has almost no thematic ties to the interesting story of the rest of Disney Springs, and the retail often feels half-baked and thrown together. I do like the more dated Eisner-era elements that were products of the 1990s, but there's still a lot that could be done to the area without removing them. Still, Disney Springs as both a major refurbishment project and thematic story is a mostly positive example of Imagineering during the Iger era. Hopefully, you've found the history of Disney's shopping district, from the Lake Buena Vista shopping village, to Pleasure Island and Downtown Disney, to its current iteration of Disney Springs, an interesting topic. For existing as retail and restaurant space for Walt Disney World, there's a surprising level of history behind it, and the current iteration of Disney Springs is full of lore and theming if you know where to look, only enhancing the already great experience. As always, if you want to help the video reach a wider audience, you can do me a favor by leaving a like. If you're new to the channel and have not yet hit the subscribe button with bell notification, you can do so to be alerted to new videos as they release.